What if the food that could save your life was growing right outside your door, but you didn't even know its name? This is the story of 10 forgotten Native American vegetables that still grow today. For one family in the ancient Ohio Valley, their entire world was a small, thriving garden. Their winter survival depended on it. But then, the unthinkable happened. A crippling drought baked the earth, and a sudden, killing frost threatened to destroy everything that was left. With their garden wiped out and starvation closing in, it seemed all hope was lost. But the grandmother knew a secret, a hidden pantry, scattered across the forests and wetlands, filled with resilient foods that didn't fear the cold, ancient plants, holding the power to save them. As the first snow began to fall, could this forgotten knowledge turn a story of certain disaster into one of impossible survival? Subscribe, it helps these documentaries to reach more people who are interested in ancient survival wisdom as well, and maybe help them to fall asleep. And tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. We love seeing where our audience tunes in from. Our story begins in a place of gentle abundance, a small clearing cradled in the curve of a slow-moving river. You can almost feel the late summer sun on your shoulders, a warmth that is not the sharp, demanding heat of mid-season, but a soft, golden light that seems to hold the sweetness of all the days that have come before it. The air is calm and thick, filled with the low, steady drone of insects and the faint, loamy scent of ripening food. This is the Ohio River Valley, a land of rolling hills and ancient forests, a world that moves not by the hands of a clock, but by the turning of the sun and the changing of the moon. Here, beside the quiet water, is a garden. It is not a garden of neat, straight rows or forced order, but a living, breathing community of plants, a tapestry of green and gold woven together in a harmony that has been understood for countless generations. In this garden, we meet a small family moving with the practiced, unhurried ease of those who know their place in the world. There is Elk Woman, the grandmother, her face a beautiful map of her many seasons, her silver hair braided with a strip of softened deerskin. Her movements are slow, deliberate, yet filled with a strength that comes not from muscle, but from a lifetime of knowledge. Beside her is her grandson, Little Otter, a boy of maybe 8 or 9 summers, his eyes wide with the quiet curiosity of youth, and with them is River Reed, Elk Woman's daughter and Little Otter's mother, her hands as strong and capable as her spirit is calm. She is the bridge between the ancient wisdom of her mother and the future held within her son. They move together through the heart of their garden, a place dedicated to the 3 sisters. This is not just a name, it is a description of a relationship, a sacred understanding of how the world works. The eldest sister, Corn, stands tall and proud, her sturdy stalks like green pillars reaching for the sky. Her leaves, now beginning to dry at the edges, rustle in the gentle breeze with a soft, papery sound, a whisper of the coming autumn. Elk Woman walks a path between the stalks, her hand brushing against them as if greeting old friends. She stops and shows Little Otter how to feel the ear of corn through its protective husk. "You do not need to tear it open to know," she says, her voice as soft as the river's current. "Feel its weight in your hand. Feel how firm at island," the elder sister tells you when she is ready. "You only have to listen." Little Otter places his small hands around an ear, his brow furrowed in concentration. He can feel the plump, rounded shapes of the kernels beneath the layers of silk and husk. It feels solid, heavy with promise. It feels like life. River Reed moves a few rows away, her eyes scanning the stalks, her experience allowing her to see things at a glance that others might miss. She notes the angle of the tassels, the color of the silks, 100 tiny signs that, woven together, tell the story of the coming harvest. She knows that this corn is their foundation, the food that will give them strength through the long, cold moons of winter. It is the solid, dependable heart of their survival. Woven amongst the corn, climbing its strong stalks in a graceful embrace, is the second sister, the bean. Her delicate vines spiral upwards, their leaves a lighter, more vibrant green against the deep color of the corn. From these vines hang long, slender pods, some still soft and green, others beginning to swell and dry, their beans rattling inside like tiny stones in a shaker. Elk Woman picks one of the dried pods, its skin brittle and pale. She cracks it open in her palm and shows Little Otter the beans inside. They are beautiful, each one a polished jewel of mottled purple and white. The giving sister, she explains softly. She holds on to the elder sister for strength, so she may reach the Sunday. But she does not only take, she gives back. Her roots feed the soil, making it rich so that all her sisters may eat. She teaches us that to be strong, we must also know how to help others be strong. This is a quiet and profound lesson. Little Otter looks from the bean in his grandmother's hand to the vine clinging to the corn stalk. He sees not just two plants growing near each other, but a family holding each other up. It is a circle of giving and receiving, a promise kept between the earth and the plants. River Reed sees it too. She gently untangles a bean vine that has grown a little too thick in one spot, guiding it towards a less crowded corn stalk, her hands performing the small, necessary acts of stewardship that keep the garden in balance. She is tending not just to plants, but to a relationship, and covering the ground beneath them all is the third sister, Squash. Her great broad leaves, some as wide as a man's shoulders, spread out in a living carpet of green. The leaves are rough to the touch, covered in tiny, prickly hairs that catch the morning dew and discourage crawling insects. They create a vast, shaded world at the base of the corn, a cool and moist sanctuary for the soil. This is the work of the protecting sister. She holds the precious summer moisture in the earth, preventing the sun from baking it into hard, cracked clay. Her shade keeps the roots of the corn and beans cool, and her sprawling, prickly vines make a difficult path for hungry deer or raccoons. It is her job to protect the family, and she does it well. Hidden beneath the canopy of leaves are the squash themselves, round and long, in shades of deep green, pale yellow, and creamy white. Elk Woman parts the leaves in one spot, revealing a large, perfectly formed squash resting on the dark soil. She runs her hand over its smooth, cool skin. She gives us her fruit. Elk Woman says to her grandson, but her greatest gift is the shade. She shows us that sometimes the best way to help is to shelter those who are vulnerable, to create a safe place for them to grow. Little Otter crouches down, peering into the green, shady world beneath the leaves. He sees a small toad sitting perfectly still in the coolness, and the intricate web of a spider spun between two squash stems. It is a whole world down there, safe and quiet, all thanks to the work of the protecting sister. He reaches out a tentative finger and touches one of the prickly hairs on a leaf stem. It is sharp, but not hurtful. It is a warning. It says, "Be careful here. Life is growing." The family works for a time in the comfortable silence that people who know each other well can share. The sounds are of the garden itself, the gentle thud of a ripe squash being placed in a woven basket, the soft rustle of corn leaves, the distant call of a kingfisher by the river. River Reed finds a patch where the beans are fully dried and begins to gather them, her hands moving with an efficient grace. Little Otter helps, his smaller hands carefully plucking the brittle pods from the vines. Elk Woman moves towards the edge of the garden, her eyes looking for something else. On the border between the cultivated clearing and the wilder tangle of the forest's edge stands a different kind of plant. It is tall and sturdy, with rough, diamond-shaped leaves and a magnificent plume of seeds at its very top, a deep, rich crimson that looks like a flame against the late afternoon sky. This is amaranth. It is not one of the three sisters, but an older cousin, a watchful friend. "Come," Elk Woman calls softly to Little Otter. He leaves the bean patch and goes to her side, his eyes on the beautiful, deep red seed head. "This one," his grandmother says, gesturing to the plant, "is a watcher of the garden. It is an old, old friend to our people. Many have forgotten it, but we do not." She reaches up and gently bends the heavy seed head towards them. It is made of thousands upon thousands of tiny, tightly packed blossoms, each one holding a single, minuscule seed. "This plant is patient," she continues. her voice taking on the rhythm of a story. It does not demand the best soil or the most water. It stands here at the edge, and it watches, it waits, and it holds its gift for the time when it is needed most. She shows little Otter how to rub the seed head between her palms. A shower of tiny, gleaming black seeds, smaller than the head of a pin, falls into her cupped hand. They look like specks of dust, like little pieces of the night sky. It seems impossible that such a small thing could be food. It is a food for lean times, Elk Woman explains, pouring the tiny seeds from her palm into little Otter's. They are surprisingly heavy, with a smooth, cool feel. When the corn harvest is small or the beans fail, the amaranth is always here. We can grind these seeds into flour, a flour that gives great strength, but it asks for patience. It takes many, many seeds to fill even a small bowl. It teaches us that small things, when gathered together with care, can become something great. Little Otter closes his hand around the seeds, feeling their collective weight. He understands this plant is a promise. While the corn and squash are a feast for now, the amaranth is a whisper of security for the future, a guarantee from the earth that there will always be something, as long as one knows where and how to look. It is a part of the garden's balance, not as a main crop, but as a vital form of insurance, a piece of ancient wisdom standing tall and watchful at the edge of their world. For now, it is simply a part of the landscape, another beautiful piece of a life lived in a gentle, flowing balance with the rhythms of the land. The sun sinks lower, casting long shadows from the corn stalks across the garden floor. The air begins to cool, and the scent of the river grows stronger. A sense of deep peace settles over the clearing, the kind of peace that comes from a day of good work, a full basket, and the quiet certainty that you have all that you need. Over the next days, and then the next weeks, a quiet concern began to settle over the clearing, as soft and slow as evening mist. It was not a sudden fear, but a growing awareness, a subtle shift in the rhythms of the world that only those who lived by its pulse could truly feel. The change began not with a dramatic event, but with an absence, the absence of rain. The deep, rolling thunder that usually came in the late afternoons of this season did not come. The night air, which should have been heavy with the damp scent of a watered earth, remained light and dry. At night, inside their lodge, the family no longer heard the gentle, percussive drumming of raindrops on the taut elk hide roof, a sound that had been the lullaby of their people for generations. The silence of the sky was becoming a character in their story, a quiet, watchful presence that held its breath. Day after day, the sun rose into a sky of brilliant, unwavering blue, a beauty that now felt less like a blessing and more like a stubborn refusal. The warmth, which had once felt like a gentle embrace, now had a harder edge to it, a dry heat that seemed to draw the life out of the very air. In the garden of the Three Sisters, the signs of this thirst became more visible. The great, broad leaves of the squash, which were meant to be the protectors of the soil's moisture, began to wilt in the midday heat. They would recover some of their spirit in the cool of the evening, but each day their midday slump seemed a little deeper, their recovery a little less complete. The vibrant green of their leaves began to take on a dusty, grayish tinge. The corn stalks, while still standing tall, looked weary. Their leaves were no longer supple, but brittle, and they made a dry, rasping sound in the breeze, a sound like old paper being shuffled. River Reed, walking through the rows, felt a different texture under her moccasins. The rich, dark earth, which should have been soft and yielding, had become hard-packed and ungiving. She knelt down and touched the ground between two corn stalks. It was warm, almost hot to the touch. A network of fine, spidery cracks had begun to spread across the surface. She picked up a small piece of the soil, and instead of crumbling into damp, fragrant pieces, it broke apart in her hand like a piece of dry pottery, dissolving into a fine, pale dust that the wind carried away. This was the most telling sign of all. The very foundation of their garden, the earth itself, was thirsty. The river, their other great source of life, was also telling the story of the long, dry spell. It was still flowing, a steady, patient ribbon of water, but it had shrunk away from its banks. A wide band of pale, sun-bleached stones and cracked mud, usually hidden beneath the current, was now exposed to the sky. Little Otter, who loved to play by the water's edge, noticed that he could now wade out to a large, flat rock in the middle of the current that he had never been able to reach before. He saw the tracks of raccoons and deer in the dried mud far below the usual water line, a testament to how all the creatures were having to adjust to follow the water as it receded. The river seemed to be pulling into itself, conserving its strength, becoming a quieter, more subdued version of the powerful lifeblood he had always known. One afternoon, Elk Woman stood looking not at the garden or the river, but at the sky. She held her face up to the sun, her eyes closed, feeling its heat, reading its message. River Reed came and stood beside her, the same unspoken question in her eyes. "The sky is not ready to weep," Elk Woman said, her voice calm and even. There was no worry in her tone, only deep attention, a profound acceptance of what island of... She then lowered her gaze and pointed towards the edge of the clearing, near a tangle of wild raspberry canes. "Look there, Little Otter," she said. The boy followed her gaze to where a large spider had spun its intricate web. It was a beautiful thing, a perfect wheel of silken threads, glistening with a faint iridescence in the sunlight. But it was built unusually low to the ground, anchored between the lower canes of the raspberry and a stalk of tall grass. It hung just a hand's breadth above the dusty earth. "The spider knows what is coming," Elk Woman explained, her voice a low murmur. "When the air is heavy with moisture, when the rains are near, she will build her web high, to catch the wind and the flying insects that ride on it. But when the air is dry, and she knows it will stay dry, she builds low. She builds where the ground holds the last of the night's coolness, where the small crawling things still move. She is a wise weaver. She does not fight the weather. She listens to it, and she changes her ways." It was a simple observation, but for the family, it was a profound confirmation of what they were all feeling. The land was speaking, not in a loud, demanding voice, but in 1,000 tiny whispers, in the taste of the air, the feel of the soil, the height of a spider's web, and the message was clear. The dry weather was not a fleeting mood. It was settling in for a long stay. That evening, as they sat outside their lodge, the family made a decision. There was no panic, no sense of desperation. There was only a quiet resolve, a practical and necessary shift in their thinking. To continue putting all their hope in the thirsty garden would be like the spider stubbornly building her web high in a dry wind. It was time to listen, as the spider did, and to change their ways. It was time to walk the low-lying wetlands, the floodplain forests, and the marshy edges of the river, the places where water still held on, where the earth had not forgotten how to be soft and generous. The garden, for now, had given what it could. They would turn their attention to the wild pantry, a place of deeper and more ancient resilience. The next morning, they left the garden behind and followed a narrow deer trail that led down into the lowlands near the river. The air here was immediately different. It was cooler, and it carried the damp, earthy scent of humus and decaying leaves. The sunlight, which had been so direct and harsh in the clearing, was now filtered through a canopy of sycamore and willow trees, dappling the path in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Here, life was still lush and green. Ferns grew in thick clusters, and moss covered the shaded sides of fallen logs. They had entered a different world, one that was holding the memory of water. Elk Woman walked slowly, her eyes scanning the ground, reading the language of the plants. She was looking for a specific vine, one that was easy to overlook, and then she found it, a delicate, climbing vine with leaves arranged in clusters of 5, twining itself around the stem of a jewelweed plant. This was the home of the groundnut. "Here," she said, her voice soft, "the one who hides her gifts." She knelt down and began to clear away the layer of damp leaves from the base of the vine. She used a digging stick, a simple tool of fire-hardened hickory, to gently probe the soil. The earth was soft here, and the stick sank in easily. "You must be gentle," she instructed Little Otter, who knelt beside her. "You are not taking, you are asking." With slow, careful movements, she loosened the soil around the place where the vine emerged from the ground. Then, she reached into the dark, cool earth with her hands and began to feel for what was hidden below. A moment later, she pulled her hand out, and with it came the first tuber. It was about the size of a pigeon's egg, with a rough brown skin, but it was not alone. Still attached to it by a tough, stringy root was another tuber, and then another, and another. She had unearthed a chain of them, a string of starchy pearls connected in a line, like beads on a necklace. Little Otter's eyes widened in amazement. "This is the groundnut's secret," Elk Woman said, holding up the chain for him to see. "When the sun is hot and the ground above is dry, she stores all her food, all her life, down here in the cool, dark earth. Each one of these is a little package of strength. They will be good for us through the winter." They worked together, River Reed joining them, following the winding path of the root system, carefully unearthing the chains of tubers. It was quiet, meditative work. The only sounds were the soft scrape of the digging stick, the whisper of their hands in the soil, and the gentle thud of the groundnuts as they were placed into a woven basket. They did not take every chain from every plant. They always left some behind, a gesture of gratitude and a promise for the future, ensuring that the plant would be there to offer its gifts again next year. The basket began to grow heavy, filled with the dense, life-sustaining food that the dry garden could no longer promise. After a while, they moved on, deeper into the wetlands, to a place where a slow-moving stream emptied into the main river, creating a shallow, marshy inlet. Here, the ground was too wet for the groundnut, but it was the perfect home for another of the land's hidden treasures. Standing in the shallow water, with their roots deep in the soft, rich mud, were thick stands of a plant with leaves shaped like the head of a spear or an arrow. "Arrowhead," River Reed said, pointing them out to her son. The people also called it Wapato. She waded into the cool, ankle-deep water, the soft mud squishing up between her toes. She explained that for this harvest, hands and digging sticks were not the best tools. The best tools were your own 2 feet. She began to walk slowly through the patch of arrowhead plants, her feet moving in a gentle, shuffling motion, pressing into the mud. She was not just walking, she was feeling. "You are searching for a stone in the mud," she said. "A hard, round little stone. That is the corm, the wapato. The plant keeps it safe down here, under the water and the mud." She stopped, her body perfectly still. "Ah," she murmured. With a slight twisting motion of her foot, she dislodged something from the mud. A moment later, a small, white, potato-like corm, about the size of a crabapple, floated up to the surface of the murky water. Little Otter gasped with delight. River Reed scooped it up and tossed it to him on the bank. It was smooth and firm in his hand. He watched as his mother continued her slow, graceful dance in the water, her feet reading the hidden map of the mud below. More and more of the white corms bobbed to the surface, and he and Elk Woman gathered them, rinsing them in the clear stream water before placing them in another basket. This was the second step in their shift, a move from the dry earth pantry of the groundnut to the wet earth pantry of the arrowhead. They were learning, or rather, remembering, that the land's generosity was not confined to a single garden plot. It was everywhere, in different forms, waiting for those who had the wisdom to look for it in the right places. As the sun began to lower in the sky, they had 2 full baskets, heavy with food that had been there all along, patiently waiting for a time when it would be needed. The quiet concern that had settled in their hearts over the past weeks was replaced by something else, a deep, calm reassurance, the profound peace that comes from knowing that the earth always provides for those who know how to listen. The sense of peace they had earned in the wetlands, a quiet confidence carried home in their heavy baskets of groundnuts and wapato, lingered in the air for several more days. It was a feeling of being well provided for, a deep reassurance that even when one path grew difficult, the land always offered another. They processed some of their harvest, River Reed boiling and mashing a small portion of the groundnuts into a rich, nutty-tasting meal, while Elk Woman showed Little Otter how to clean the mud from the arrowhead corms in the cool river water. The garden of the three sisters, while still suffering from the thirst, held on. It was a time of gentle work and watchful waiting. The sky remained a stubborn, cloudless blue, but their lodge was filled with the promising scent of their new harvest, a testament to their willingness to adapt. The family moved through their days with a renewed sense of purpose, a calm rhythm that acknowledged the challenge of the drought but was not ruled by it. Then, one evening, as the sun began its descent, the world changed. The sunset itself was unusually spectacular, the dry, dust-filled air painting the western sky in streaks of fiery orange and deep bruised purple. The colors were sharp, almost violent in their intensity, a beauty that had a cold, hard edge to it. As the last sliver of the sun's orange disk disappeared behind the distant hills, the warmth of the day did not fade gently as it usually did. It was not a slow, soft surrender to the coolness of evening. It was snatched away, stolen by a new kind of chill that entered the air. This was not the familiar, damp coolness that rose from the river after dark, the kind that smelled of wet stones and green, living things. This was a shiver in the air itself, a thin, sharp cold that felt as if it had sharp edges. It was a dry, biting cold that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, a presence that made the tiny hairs on their arms stand up. Little Otter, who was sitting near the entrance of the lodge, suddenly wrapped his arms around himself. River Reed, coming back from the river's edge with a water skin, paused mid-stride, her head tilted, listening to a silence she had not noticed before. The constant, thrumming chorus of crickets and katydids, the sonic tapestry of a late summer evening, had fallen quiet. The frogs in the marshy inlet were silent. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath, bracing for something. Elk Woman was standing near the center of the clearing, her body perfectly still. She had been examining the drying husks of the corn, but now her attention was turned completely to the feel of the air. She raised her face, not to the sky, but to the faint, almost imperceptible breeze that had begun to stir from the north. Her eyes were closed, her expression one of deep, solemn concentration. She was not seeing or hearing the change. She was tasting it, feeling it on her skin, reading it with senses that had been honed by a lifetime of paying attention. She took a slow, deep breath through her nose, and the coldness of it was sharp in her sinuses. A memory stirred within her, the memory of a cold like this from her own childhood, a frost that had come too soon, a hunger moon that had followed. She opened her eyes, and the wisdom of those many seasons was reflected in their depths. There was no fear there, but a profound and absolute seriousness had settled over her features. She looked at her daughter, and their eyes met across the clearing. River Reed saw the knowledge in her mother's gaze and felt a knot of concern tighten in her stomach. She knew this was not the gentle hand of autumn beckoning them towards winter. This was a sudden, hard fist closing around their world. "A killing frost," River Reed said, her voice barely a whisper, the words seeming to crystallize in the cold air. It was a thought so unwelcome she had not dared to form it until she saw the confirmation in her mother's face. A frost now, so early, would be a catastrophe for the garden. The bean vines, their leaves still green and tender, would be the first to die. A frost would turn them into blackened, limp rags overnight. The young beans, still soft inside their pods, turned to mush, their promise of winter protein lost forever. The great leaves of the squash, already weakened by the drought, would offer no protection. They would collapse, turning dark and watery, leaving the squash themselves exposed. Some of the larger ones might survive, but any that were still growing, still tender, would be ruined, their skins turning soft and prone to rot. But the greatest loss would be the corn. Much of it was still in its final stage of ripening, the kernels still filled with the milky liquid that would harden into the dense, starchy grain they depended upon. A hard frost would freeze that liquid, bursting the delicate cells of the kernels, turning their primary winter food source into something that would simply rot on the stalk. The harvest they had so carefully tended, the foundation of their winter survival, was now in terrible danger of being wiped out in a single, silent night. The work of an entire season could be undone between this sunset and the next sunrise. For a long moment, no one moved. The profound quiet of the natural world seemed to have settled over them as well. The vibrant sky had faded to a cold steel gray, and the first, impossibly bright stars were beginning to appear. The air was getting colder still, the chill now a palpable thing that sank into their clothes and touched their skin with icy fingers. Inside Little Otter's chest, a small seed of fear began to sprout. He looked at the garden, at the familiar, comforting shapes of the cornstalks standing like shadowy sentinels in the dusk, and he could feel the cold touching them, hurting them. He looked to his grandmother, his eyes wide with a question he did not know how to ask. Elk Woman walked over to him and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Her hand was warm and steady. She looked not at the garden of the three sisters, but past it, towards the dark line of the forest and the low, marshy ground by the river. Her gaze was distant, as if she were looking at a map only she could see. Then, a transformation occurred. The deep seriousness on her face did not leave, but it was joined by something else, a quiet, unshakable resolve. The time for watching and waiting was over. The time for a different kind of work had begun. "There is no panic," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the heavy silence. It was not a command, but a simple statement of fact, a reminder of who they were. Panic is a useless fire that consumes your strength and gives you no warmth. We do not have time for it. She turned to River Reed. "The sisters in the garden may have to sleep early this year. We will save what we can in the morning. But tonight, we will honor the gifts we have been given. We will prepare for the work to come." In that moment, the energy of the family shifted. The cold, creeping dread was pushed aside by a focused, methodical sense of purpose. There was no wasted motion, no frantic discussion. They moved with the unhurried efficiency of people who knew exactly what needed to be done. River Reed went to the lodge and firmly secured the heavy hide flap over the entrance, tucking the edges in to seal out the encroaching cold. She began to build up the fire in the central pit, not a large, roaring blaze, but a small, hot fire of seasoned hickory that would burn steadily through the night, creating a heart of warmth and light in their small home. The soft crackle of the wood and the rising scent of wood smoke was an immediate comfort, a defense against the cold and silence outside. Little Otter was given the task of bringing in the baskets of groundnuts and wapato from where they were airing out. As he carried them into the warm, fire-lit space of the lodge, the simple, earthy weight of them was a comfort. This was food they already had. This was a promise already kept. Elk Woman did not join them right away. She walked once more to the edge of the clearing and gathered her tools, which had been left leaning against a log. Her fire-hardened digging stick, a large, flat-bottomed gathering basket, its woven straps strong and secure, another, smaller basket for more delicate things. She moved with a grace that defied the cold, her actions deliberate and full of meaning. She was not simply collecting her tools. She was preparing for a sacred duty. She was gathering the instruments of a different kind of harvest, one that was not dictated by the warmth of the sun, but by the coming of the frost. When she returned to the lodge, her face was calm. In the flickering firelight, she looked at her daughter and grandson. "The frost is a hardship," she said, her voice as steady as the stones of the fire pit. "It takes things from us, but there are some gifts that only the frost can unlock. There are some foods that wait for the cold. They are the foods that do not fear the winter, because they carry its strength inside them. Tomorrow at first light, we will go and ask them for their help." There was no more talk of the loss in the garden. Their focus had shifted entirely. The disaster that was descending upon their corn and beans was now understood not as an ending, but as a turn in the path, a turn that was leading them towards a different kind of abundance, a deeper and more resilient knowledge. As they settled in for the night, wrapped in their warm furs, the air in the lodge was thick with the scent of smoke and a quiet determination. Outside, the temperature continued to drop. The stars shone with a brilliant, frozen clarity in the black sky. The killing cold crept silently through the garden, touching the leaves of the beans and the stalks of the corn with its invisible, deadly fingers. But inside the lodge, 3 hearts beat in a calm, steady rhythm. The time for waiting was over. The urgent, methodical search was about to begin. The dawn that broke over the Ohio Valley was a world transformed, remade in silence and cold. The first light was not the soft, golden wash they were used to, but a thin, crystalline whiteness that seemed to drain the color from the world. When Elk Woman pushed aside the heavy lodge flap, the air that met her was so cold it felt like a physical thing, a solid presence that caught in her throat. Every surface was painted with a delicate silver lace of frost. Every blade of grass, every curled, fallen leaf, every single stalk of the ruined corn in their garden was edged in a shimmering, razor-thin layer of ice. The world was beautiful, but it was the beautiful, terrible beauty of a thing that had died. As River Reed and Little Otter emerged behind her, a collective breath held steady. They stood for a moment, their own breath pluming in front of them in white clouds, and they made a deliberate, unspoken choice. They did not walk to the garden. They did not go to survey the damage, to touch the blackened, limp leaves of the bean vines, or the collapsed, watery ruin of the squash. To look too closely at what was lost would be to give power to despair, and they had no strength to spare for that. Their grief for the 3 sisters could wait. It would be a quiet, private mourning. Today was for the living. Today was for what remained. With a shared, silent understanding, they turned their backs on the garden and its silent tragedy. Elk Woman led the way, not towards the river wetlands where they had found the groundnuts and wapato, but in a different direction, towards an open, sunnier patch of meadowland that bordered the forest. The ground beneath their moccasins was as hard and unyielding as stone, and their footsteps made a sharp, crunching sound, the only noise in the profoundly still morning. The sun was just beginning to climb above the distant tree line, a pale white disk in a washed-out sky. It offered light, but as yet, no warmth. Its rays struck the frosted landscape and shattered into a million tiny points of cold, glittering light. Little Otter walked between his mother and grandmother, his gathering basket feeling large and empty in his small, cold hands. He wanted to look back at the familiar shapes of the corn stalks, but he felt the gentle pressure of River Reed's hand on his back, guiding him forward, keeping his eyes on the path ahead. The message was clear. Do not look back. We are walking towards what will save us, not away from what we have lost. After a walk of some time, Elk Woman stopped. They had reached a section of the meadow where the grass grew thin, a place that received the full force of the summer Sunday. Before them stood a patch of what, to an unknowing eye, would look like failure. It was a dense thicket of tall, dead stalks, some as high as a man's head. The stalks were brown and brittle, their leaves withered to a crisp. At the very top of each stalk, the ghost of a flower remained, a cluster of faded yellow petals, drooping and lifeless, like a memory of summer. The entire patch looked utterly desolate, a testament to the killing power of the frost. It seemed the most lifeless place they could have possibly come to. Little Otter looked at the dead plants, and then up at his grandmother, his face a mask of confusion. Why had she brought them here? This place looked even sadder than their own garden. Elk Woman saw his confusion, and a small, calm smile touched her lips. She reached out and touched one of the brittle stalks. Looks can be deceiving, Little Otter, she said, her voice soft in the cold air. Sometimes, the greatest strength is not in the green leaf that reaches for the Sunday. Sometimes, the greatest strength is hidden in the dark, where no one can see it. This plant, its spirit, has not died. It has only gone to sleep, deep in the earth. This was the home of the sunchoke, the Jerusalem artichoke, the root that held the Sunday. It was a plant that understood the seasons in a way the corn and beans did not. It knew the frost was coming, and it had spent the entire end of the summer preparing for it. While the three sisters were putting their energy into their fruits and seeds high up in the air, the sunchoke was quietly sending all of its life, all of its gathered sunlight and sweetness, down into the safety of the dark, cold earth. The frost, which had been a killer to the garden, was a signal to the sunchoke. It was the final sign that its work above ground was done, and that the time had come to rest and protect its treasure below. This one is a great teacher, Elk Woman continued, addressing both her daughter and her grandson. It teaches us that we do not have to fight the hardship. We can prepare for it. We can move our spirit to a safe place until the hardship passes. With that, she knelt on the hard, frosted ground. She took her fire-hardened digging stick, its hickory surface worn smooth with years of use, and she placed its sharpened point into the earth at the base of one of the dead stalks. There was a faint, sharp crackle as the tip of the stick broke through the thin, frozen crust of the soil. Then began the steady, rhythmic work of the harvest. The narration of the day became the sound of the digging stick, a soothing, repetitive guide to the process. There was the initial gentle scrape, 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 as Elk Woman cleared away the frosted surface soil. Then a firmer, more deliberate push, and the soft, muffled thud as the stick sank deeper into the cold earth beneath. She was not stabbing or prying. Her movements were careful, almost reverent. She was listening with her hands, feeling the resistance of the soil, sensing where the hidden roots spread. After loosening a circle of earth all the way around the base of the stalk, she laid her stick aside and plunged her hands into the opening she had made. The soil was cold, so cold it made her fingers ache at first, but she worked through the discomfort. She broke apart the clods of dark earth, her fingers searching. River Reed knelt beside her, working on the next plant, her motions a perfect, practiced echo of her mother's. The only sounds were the scrape and thud of their work, and the sound of their own quiet breathing in the still cold air. Little Otter watched for a moment, then knelt and began to copy them, his own small digging stick seeming clumsy in his hands. He scraped at the frozen ground, his movements small and uncertain. He pushed, but the earth was too hard. River Reed paused in her work and gently adjusted his grip on the stick. "Not with your arms," she said softly. "With your weight. Let the stick do the work. Just guide it." He tried again, leaning his small body into the tool, and this time he felt the satisfying crunch as the tip broke through the frost layer. A small victory. Encouraged, he began to dig in earnest, clearing the soil away, his eyes wide with anticipation. And then, Elk Woman's hands stopped moving. "Ah," she murmured, a sound of discovery. She carefully worked her fingers deeper, underneath something hard and lumpy. With a final, gentle lift, she pulled her hands from the earth, and clutched within them, covered in rich, dark soil, was a cluster of tubers. They were pale, almost white, with a thin skin that had a faint purplish tinge. They were knobby and irregular, growing in a dense clump, some large and round like a fist, others small and long like a finger. They looked nothing like the uniform beauty of a corn kernel or the smooth perfection of a bean. They were rugged, earthy, and undeniably alive. "This is it," Elk Woman said, holding the clump for Little Otter to see. "This is the sun's promise." She used her thumb to rub the dirt from one of the tubers, revealing the clean, pale skin beneath. All summer long, this plant stood here and gathered the sunlight in its leaves. It drank the light. And then, as the days grew shorter, it sent all that light, all that warmth, all that life, down into these roots to keep it safe. The frost cannot touch it here. The cold cannot steal it. It is sleeping, waiting to share its strength with us. She broke one of the smaller tubers from the clump and handed it to the boy. It was cool and solid in his palm, surprisingly heavy for its size. He could feel its density, the life packed tightly within it. It felt like holding a smooth, heavy stone that was humming with a secret energy. He put it in his basket, and the soft thud it made as it landed was a deeply satisfying sound. It was the first piece of their winter, a sound of hope. They fell into a comfortable, productive silence, the three of them working as a single unit. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and slowly, gently, its warmth began to be felt. The white frost on the dead leaves of the sunchokes began to melt, dripping in silent, silvery tears onto the ground below. The sharp, frozen crunch of the earth softened. The air lost its biting edge. As they worked, a rhythm established itself. Scrape, scrape, thud. Reach into the cold, dark earth. Feel for the hard, knobby shapes. Lift the cluster. Gently shake the loose soil free and place it in the basket. Move to the next stalk. Scrape, scrape, thud. It was a meditation in motion. Their hands became covered in the dark, rich soil. The smell of the cold, damp earth filled the air, a clean, vital scent. With each cluster of sunchokes that was unearthed, their baskets grew heavier. The small thuds of the first tubers were replaced by the softer sound of them nesting against each other, a growing mound of pale, life-sustaining roots. The emptiness little Otter had felt in his basket and in his heart was slowly being filled. He began to understand what his grandmother meant. The dead stalks above the ground were not the real plant. They were just a memory. The real plant, the true life, was here, hidden beneath his feet. It was an entire world of food, safe and waiting, that he had walked past 100 times without ever knowing it was there. This was the deepest lesson of the day, that nourishment and security are not always visible. Sometimes, they must be sought with knowing hands and a patient heart. The warmth of the sun that had seemed so pale and distant was here, transformed into something solid and real that they could hold, something that would feed them when the world outside was locked in ice. The sunchoke was not just a food, it was a promise, a story of survival whispered from the sun, to the plant, to the earth, and now, finally, to them. Their hands were cold, their backs were beginning to ache, but their spirits were calm and their baskets were growing heavy with the stored light of summer. They worked until the sun was high in the sky, its pale warmth now strong enough to have melted the last remnants of the frost from all but the deepest shadows. The patch of dead sunchoke stalks now looked different. Each one was surrounded by a neat circle of turned earth, a sign of the gift that had been asked for and received. Their main gathering baskets were almost full, heavy with the dense, knobby tubers. The sheer weight of them was a comfort, a tangible measure of their security against the coming winter. The fear that had arrived with the cold the night before had been replaced by the quiet satisfaction of hard, productive work. Straightening up, River Reed stretched her back, the muscles warm from the steady labor. She looked at their harvest, at the pale tubers peeking out from the tops of the baskets, and a deep sense of gratitude filled her. They had what they needed. It was enough. But Elk Woman, ever watchful, was not yet finished. As they paused to rest for a moment, she tilted her head, her senses attuned to more than just the sight of the meadow. She was listening, smelling, feeling the subtle currents of the air, and then she caught it, a faint, sweet fragrance drifting on the gentle breeze that stirred from the direction of the nearby forest. It was a unique scent, unlike any other in the woods. It was not the sharp, resinous smell of pine or the earthy aroma of damp leaves. This was a rich, complex sweetness, a smell like ripe banana mixed with mango and a hint of vanilla, a perfume that seemed to belong to a much warmer, more tropical place. It was a smell that spoke of unexpected sweetness, of a hidden treasure. Little Otter, his nose twitching like a young rabbit's, smelled it too. "What is that?" he asked, his voice filled with a child's pure, uncomplicated curiosity. It was a smell of pure delight, a happy smell that seemed out of place in this cold post-frost world. Elk Woman's calm expression softened into a genuine, warm smile. "Ah," she said, her voice filled with gentle affection. "That is a gift, a sweet treat from the forest, meant just for a day like today. It is a reward for our hard work." Her words hung in the air, creating a small bubble of joyful anticipation. This was not about survival anymore. This was about pleasure, about a spontaneous gift offered up by the land. "Let us follow our noses," she said, and with a renewed lightness in their steps, they picked picked up their now lighter digging sticks and the smaller empty basket and walked towards the tree line, following the invisible trail of that wonderful, custard-like fragrance. The scent grew stronger as they entered the shade of the forest, leading them to a small, sheltered grove of trees that Little Otter did not recognize. They were not tall, imposing trees like the oaks or maples. These were smaller, more slender, understory trees, with smooth gray bark and large, simple leaves that had already turned a soft, buttery yellow. Many of the leaves had fallen, creating a thick golden carpet on the forest floor. The trees themselves looked unremarkable, almost shy, hidden as they were amongst their larger neighbors. But the air all around them was thick with that intoxicating, sweet perfume. And then, Little Otter saw the source. Lying scattered amongst the yellow leaves on the ground were the fruits. They were oblong, shaped something like a short, plump bean pod, and they were a soft, greenish-yellow color, some with mottled brown or black patches on their skin. This was the pawpaw, the last fruit of the season, a secret taste of summer offered up on the very cusp of winter. Little Otter, guided by pure instinct, bent down to pick one up. "Wait," River Reed said, her voice gentle but firm. "Let your grandmother show you how to choose. Not all are ready." Elk Woman knelt down beside the fallen fruit, her movements as careful and deliberate as they had been with the sunchokes. But this time, her touch was much lighter. This harvest required a different kind of sensitivity. "The pawpaw," she explained, "is a delicate thing. It does not ripen on the branch and wait to be picked. It holds on to its unripe sourness until the very last moment, and then, when it is perfectly ready, it lets go. It falls to the earth as a willing gift. The ones still clinging to the branches, even those that looked yellow and ready, were not to be taken." "The tree knows when the fruit is sweet," Elk Woman murmured, her fingers hovering over a pawpaw lying on the leaves. "It will not give it to you until it is ready. We must have the patience to accept the gift only when it is offered." This was a lesson in patience and respect, a counterpoint to the hard work of digging for the sunchokes. That was a harvest they had actively sought and worked for. This was one they simply had to be willing to receive. The process of gathering became a moment of pure, unexpected joy amidst the seriousness of their day. Elk Woman showed Little Otter the signs of a perfectly ripe fruit. The skin should be soft, yielding to a gentle press of the thumb, much like a ripe peach. There should be some brown or black splotches on the skin. This was not a sign of rot, but a sign that the sugars inside were at their peak, and the fragrance should be strong and sweet. She picked one up and held it to his nose. The scent was incredible, a concentrated burst of that sweet, fruity perfume that filled the whole grove. She then gently broke the soft fruit in half with her thumbs. The flesh inside was a beautiful, creamy, golden-orange color, with a smooth, custard-like texture. Embedded in the pulp were several large, dark brown seeds, smooth and shiny like polished stones. Handing him one of the halves, she said, "This is a taste of the sun, just like the sunchoke, but this one did not hide it underground. This one kept it in its skin. It is meant to be enjoyed right away." Little Otter took a tentative taste. His eyes went wide with delight. The flavor was an explosion of sweetness on his tongue, a complex taste he had never experienced before. It was like all the best fruits of summer. Wild strawberries, ripe melons, sweet plums, had been blended together into a single, creamy, delicious pudding. A wide, sticky smile spread across his face, a smile of pure, uncomplicated bliss. For a moment, the cold of the morning, the worry about the winter, the loss of the garden, all of it disappeared. There was only this incredible sweet taste, a spontaneous moment of pure happiness. River Reed and Elk Woman smiled as they watched him, sharing in his joy. They too ate a fruit, their movements slow and appreciative, savoring the fleeting, precious flavor. This was a moment of grace, a reminder that the land provided not just sustenance for the body, but also joy for the spirit. It was a lesson in gratitude, in the importance of stopping to accept the spontaneous, beautiful gifts the world offers, even or perhaps especially in difficult times. They did not gather in a rush. They moved slowly through the small grove, their eyes scanning the golden carpet of leaves, their senses guided by sight and scent. The gathering was a quiet, gentle process. Each ripe pawpaw was a discovery, a small treasure to be carefully picked up and placed in the smaller basket, which River Reed had lined with soft moss to cushion the delicate fruit. They handled them as if they were fragile eggs, their soft skins bruising easily. This was not a harvest of bulk or weight, like the sunchokes. This was a harvest of rare and precious sweetness. "We do not take many," Elk Woman explained. "We take only what we can eat soon or dry carefully for later. This is a fleeting gift. We must leave the rest for our other brothers and sisters in the forest. The raccoon, the opossum, the turtle, they all love this sweet fruit as much as we do." This was another important lesson for Little Otter. He looked around and saw the tracks of other animals in the soft earth of the grove. He understood that this patch of sweetness did not belong only to them. It was a shared blessing, a community pantry. To take too much would be greedy, an act of disrespect to the tree that offered the gift and to the other creatures who depended on it. They filled their small basket only halfway, a modest but precious haul. It was enough. With the lingering sweet taste of pawpaw in their mouths and the heavy baskets of sunchokes resting at their feet, they paused for a final moment in the quiet of the grove. The serious, urgent work of the morning had been balanced by this interlude of pure, simple joy. They had provided for their bodies, and now their spirits felt nourished as well. The frost had taken much, but it could not take this. This secret sweetness, this hidden gift, was a quiet but powerful reminder of the resilience and the surprising, abundant generosity of the world. With their baskets now heavy, one with the dense, earthy weight of the sunchokes, the other with the delicate, sweet fragility of the pawpaws, the family made their way back towards their clearing. They did not return directly to their lodge, but instead moved to a small, sheltered camp area a short distance away, a place designed specifically for the work that was to come. It was a space nestled in a grove of tall oak trees that offered protection from the wind, with a large, flat stone near the center that served as a work surface, and a well-established fire pit ringed with river stones, its ashes holding the memory of countless hours of patient work. Here, the focus of their day shifted once more. The gathering was done. Now began the slow, rhythmic, and deeply important work of preservation and processing. This next phase of their survival was not a journey through the landscape, but a journey of transformation, a meditation on the steady, deliberate work that turns a raw harvest into lasting nourishment. The air in this small camp was filled not with grand dramas, but with the quiet, soothing, repetitive sounds of ancient crafts, a symphony of stone and fire. They had brought with them another basket from their lodge, one that was already partially filled. Inside were hickory nuts, gathered patiently over the past weeks, their hard, pale shells looking like smooth, thick pieces of wood. These nuts were a powerhouse of life, packed with the rich oils and proteins that would sustain them through the deep cold of winter. But their gifts were not given freely. They were locked away inside a shell as hard as stone, and the nut meats themselves held a bitter taste that had to be gently coaxed out. The first rhythm of the camp was the sound of a stone. Elk Woman took a handful of the hickory nuts and placed them on the large, flat rock. She then picked up a second stone, a smaller one that fit comfortably in her hand, its surface worn smooth from years of use. This was her hammerstone. Little Otter sat beside her, watching with rapt attention. Her movements were not forceful or violent. She did not raise the stone high and bring it crashing down. Instead, she brought it down with a short, controlled, precise motion, a steady tap, tap, tap. The sound was not a loud crack, but a contained, satisfying thud. With each tap, a small fracture would appear in the thick shell of the nut, and after a few well-aimed blows, the shell would fall away in 2 or 3 large pieces, revealing the pale, wrinkled nut meat inside. She handed a hammerstone to Little Otter and gave him a nut. "Patience," she said softly. You are not trying to break the nut. You are trying to persuade the shell to open. If you hit it too hard, you will crush the meat inside, and it will be lost. Little Otter tried, his first blow skittering off the rounded surface of the nut. The second was too soft. The third, in his frustration, was too hard, and the nut shattered into a dozen tiny, useless fragments. He looked down at the mess, his face clouded with disappointment. River Reed, who had been building a small, steady fire in the pit, came over and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It is a conversation between the stone and the shell," she said, her voice calm. "Your hand is just the guide. Feel the weight of the stone. Listen to the sound it makes. The nut will teach you." He took another one, closed his eyes for a second, and focused only on the feel of the tools in his hands. He tapped gently, then a little harder, listening, feeling. Tap, tap, and then a soft, satisfying crack. The shell fell away cleanly. A wide smile broke out on his face. He had learned the rhythm. And so, the steady, percussive sound of the two stones tapping against the hickory shells filled the small clearing, a sound as old as the hills themselves. It was a sound of patient, steady work, the first step in unlocking the hidden richness of the forest. While they worked on the nuts, another task was beginning, this one involving the transformative power of water. Elk Woman took the growing pile of shelled nut meats and placed them into a tightly woven basket. She then carried this basket to the edge of the river and placed it in a shallow, slow-moving eddy, securing it with a heavy stone so the gentle current could not carry it away. "The river will help us now," she explained to Little Otter, who had followed her down to the bank. "The hickory nut is strong, but it holds a bitterness in its heart. The cold, clean water of the river will wash this bitterness away. It is a slow bath. It will take many hours. The river is a good mother. She knows how to be gentle." This process was called leaching. It was a quiet, almost invisible form of work. There was no sound, no dramatic action, just the slow, patient magic of cold water flowing over the nut meats, carrying away the tannins that made them sharp and unpleasant to the taste, leaving only the sweet, rich flavor behind. It was another lesson in patience, a reminder that some of the most important transformations are the ones that happen slowly, quietly, and without force. They would leave the nuts in the river's gentle care and return for them later, when their bath was complete. Back at the small camp, River Reed had turned her attention to another of the forest's hidden gifts, one that was even smaller and more patient than the hickory nut. From a pouch at her belt, she poured out a stream of tiny black seeds. They were so small they looked like fine grains of black sand. These were the seeds of an unassuming plant that grew in disturbed soil at the edge of the clearings. A plant many would call a weed. It was lamb's quarters, or chenopodium, a distant relative of the amaranth they had seen in their garden. Its seeds were a powerhouse of nutrition, a grain that had sustained her ancestors for thousands of years. But like the nuts, they required a careful process to make them ready to eat. River Reed took a shallow, tightly woven basket, almost like a flat plate, and placed a handful of the tiny black seeds into it. Next to the fire pit, a collection of small, smooth river pebbles had been sitting in the hot embers at the edge of the flames. Using 2 sticks as tongs, she carefully picked up a few of these searing hot pebbles and dropped them into the basket with the seeds. Immediately, she began to move the basket in a constant, swirling, circular motion. It was a graceful, rhythmic dance of the wrists, keeping the seeds and the hot pebbles in a constant state of flux, rolling and tumbling over one another. This was parching. The intense, dry heat from the pebbles was toasting the tiny seeds, releasing their moisture and awakening their nutty, earthy flavor. A soft, hissing sound filled the air, the collective whisper of thousands of tiny seeds releasing their spirit. A rich, nutty aroma, like toasted bread in warm earth, began to rise from the basket, a wonderfully comforting smell that blended with the wood smoke from the fire. This process required absolute concentration and a steady hand. If she stopped moving the basket for even a second, the intense heat from the pebbles would burn the seeds. If her motion was too slow, they would not toast evenly. She moved with the practiced ease of a master craftswoman, her body and the basket moving as one. Little Otter watched, mesmerized by the smooth, continuous motion and the wonderful sounds and smells. This was a different kind of fire, a fire not contained in a pit, but held and controlled in the palm of her hand. It was a precise and beautiful art, a quiet conversation between seeds, stone, and fire. After a few minutes, when the hissing sound subsided and the nutty aroma was at its peak, she skillfully used one of the sticks to flick the now cooler pebbles out of the basket and onto the ground. What remained was a pile of parched seeds, their color now a toasty grayish brown. They were now shelf-stable, ready to be stored for the winter and ground into a highly nutritious flour. It was a slow, painstaking process. Each handful of seeds took several minutes of constant, focused work, but the rhythm of it was deeply calming. The swirl of the basket, the hiss of the seeds, the rich, warm smell that filled the air. These were the rhythms that turned the raw, inedible gifts of the land into the things that would keep them warm and strong through the winter moons. The sun began to sink lower, casting long, peaceful shadows through the oak trees. The small, sheltered camp was an island of warmth and purposeful activity. The tap, tap, tap of the nut-cracking stones provided a steady, percussive beat. The gentle hiss and swirl of the seed parching added a softer, more continuous layer of sound. And weaving through it all was the low crackle of the fire and the rich, blended aromas of wood smoke and roasting seeds. This was the quiet, essential work that the harvest demanded. It was not just about finding food. It was about honoring it with the patient, skillful work of the hands, transforming it with the ancient magic of fire, water, and stone into the promise of life for the days to come. The following day dawned with a softer light, the air retaining a deep chill, but without the sharp, crystalline bite of the frost. The sun, a hazy gold, promised a slow warming, a brief respite from the sudden onset of winter's herald. After retrieving the basket of hickory nuts from the river, their bitterness washed away by the night's gentle current, the family's journey continued. Their search for sustenance was not a random wandering, but a purposeful following of signs, a reading of the land's more subtle invitations. Elk Woman led them away from the open meadows and deeper into the wooded hills that rose from the river valley. She chose a path that followed a small spring-fed creek, a place that held a different kind of life than the main river. This creek was a lifeline of its own, a thread of clear, cold water that murmured over moss-covered stones and nourished a unique community of plants and animals. Here, the world felt older, more secluded, the air thick with the damp, rich smell of decaying leaves and the quiet gurgle of moving water. This was a place where life was still vibrant and green, protected from the worst of the frost by the thick canopy of trees and the constant, gentle breath of the spring. Elk Woman's movements were slow and deliberate, her eyes not looking far ahead, but scanning the ground nearby, taking in the myriad of tiny details that told the story of the place. She was a master reader of a language written in bent twigs, disturbed leaves, and the specific shades of green on the forest floor. She paused and pointed to a faint trail, almost invisible to the untrained eye, that crossed their path and headed down towards the creek. "Dear," she said softly to Little Otter, her voice a low murmur that blended with the sound of the water. "They come here to drink where the water is sweet. They know this is a good place." Further on, she pointed out the delicate, lacy tracks of a wild turkey etched into a patch of soft mud, and the heavier, more deliberate prints of a raccoon near the water's edge. She was teaching him to see the forest not as a collection of trees, but as a neighborhood, a bustling community filled with beings who all had their own paths, their own needs, their own stories. Seeing these signs was a comfort. It meant the land was healthy, that the web of life was strong and unbroken. They were not alone here. They were walking through a shared home, and the presence of their animal brothers was a quiet reassurance. Their path took them to a damp, shady hollow where the creek pooled for a moment before continuing its journey. The ground here was soft and springy underfoot, a thick carpet of humus built up over countless seasons. The air was cool and smelled sharply of green, living things. And here, in this sheltered, moist place, they found what Elk Woman had been seeking. It was a patch of plants that seemed to have completely ignored the coming of the cold. Their leaves were a lush, vibrant green, broad and smooth, standing out in brilliant contrast against the browning, gold-flecked carpet of the forest floor. The patch was a small island of persistent, determined life. Little Otter leaned closer and could already smell their unique scent before his grandmother even named them. It was a sharp, pungent, and deeply savory aroma, a smell that was part onion, part garlic, but with a wild green note all its own. This was the scent of ramps, the wild leeks that were one of the first green things to emerge in the spring, and one of the last to fade in the fall. The strong-scented ones, Elk Woman said, her voice filled with respect. Their spirit is so strong you can smell it in the air. They are a powerful medicine, a food that wakes up the body. She showed Little Otter how to harvest them with care. The edible part was the slender white bulb and the tender lower part of the reddish-purple stem. To get to it, they had to be dug, but a digging stick would damage too many of the surrounding plants. The proper tool was the hand. She knelt and showed him how to gently work his fingers into the soft, loose soil around the base of a ramp, feeling for the small, firm bulb. Once he had a gentle grip, he could pull it from the earth with a soft, satisfying pop. She stressed the importance of selective harvesting. We never take all the plants from one patch, she explained, her voice serious. That would be like taking all the eggs from a nest. It would leave the patch weak and sad. We take one from here and leave 3. We take another from over there and leave its brothers. We walk through the patch like a gentle rain, taking only a little from each spot, so the whole patch remains strong and can offer its gift again in the spring. Little Otter followed her example, his small hands carefully working into the cool, dark earth. Each time he freed a ramp from the soil, the sharp, savory scent would puff into the air, a small explosion of wild perfume. It was a clean, invigorating smell that seemed to fill him with energy. They gathered the ramps, their beautiful green leaves and purple-tinted stems, and carefully placed them in their basket, their pungent aroma a promise of flavorful winter meals to come, a taste of life to be added to their stores of starchy roots and rich nuts. As they were finishing their gentle harvest, River Reed, whose eyes were always scanning the wider world around them, suddenly went still. She put a hand on her son's shoulder, a silent signal to be quiet and look. He followed her gaze across the small creek. There, pressed into a soft bank of sandy soil, was a track. It was large and clear, the print of a heavy paw with 4 distinct toe pads and the faint impression of claws. "Wolf," she whispered, her voice not filled with fear, but with a deep and profound respect, almost a sense of awe. Little Otter felt a thrill, a mix of excitement and a little bit of fear. A wolf had been here, in this very spot, perhaps only hours before. He imagined its silent, powerful form moving through the trees, its intelligent eyes watching everything. He instinctively moved a little closer to his mother. Elk Woman came over and looked at the track, studying it for a long moment. She saw no fear in it, only information. "He is one of the old ones," she said, her voice full of reverence. "He is walking his trap line, checking on his world, just as we are. To see his track is a good sign." Little Otter looked at her, confused. How could the track of such a powerful predator be a good sign? "Because his presence means the land is healthy," Elk Woman explained, anticipating his question. "The wolf does not live in a sick or empty forest. He lives where there are deer to hunt, where the water is clean to drink, where the world is in balance. When the wolf is here, it tells us that all the other parts of the forest family are also here and are also strong. He is not a threat to us. We are not his food, and he is not ours. We are just 2 different kinds of hunters, walking the same path. His presence is a sign that our work, our harvest, is taking place in a land that is whole and complete. It is not a moment of fear, but of respect." Her words shifted the feeling in the air. The thrill Little Otter felt was no longer tinged with fear, but with a sense of connection. He looked at the paw print again, and he no longer saw just a wolf. He saw a fellow traveler, a guardian of the forest's health. He felt a deep sense of belonging, a feeling that they were part of something much larger, a vast and intricate community of living things, from the smallest ramp bulb hidden in the soil to the great wolf who walked the ridges. They left the track undisturbed, a quiet monument to their powerful neighbor, and continued on their way, their hearts a little fuller, their understanding of their place in the world a little deeper. The scent of ramps in their basket and the image of the wolf track in their minds. They were gathering more than just food. They were gathering the story of a healthy, balanced land, a story they were an integral part of. The cold was no longer a visitor. It had moved in and begun rearranging the world. The damp, soft earth of the river bottoms was now firm, the mud around the arrowhead patch holding the clear, sharp impression of Little Otter's moccasin from the day before, frozen solid. The landscape had undergone a subtle, profound transformation. The vibrant, noisy green of late summer was gone, replaced by a palette of soft browns, deep rusts, and the pale, bleached gray of skeletal branches. The air was dry and clear, carrying sounds from much farther away, the snap of a distant twig, the call of a crow from across the valley, with a startling crispness. This was the deep cold, the true beginning of the lean season. Yet, as the family left their lodge that morning, there was no sense of dread, only a calm, steady purpose. Their baskets were already promisingly heavy with the stored wealth of the earth, and the lessons of the past few days had taught them that the land's gifts did not end when the green faded. Elk Woman led them away from the creek and the shadowy protection of the deep woods, guiding them up onto a low, open ridge that caught the full brunt of the wind. This was where the frost had been most severe, where the last of the meadow grasses were laid flat in brittle, shining waves. It seemed an unlikely place to find life, but the grandmother's steps were sure. She was looking for a specific presence in this place of apparent barrenness. They walked among the stark, gray skeletons of the larger trees until they came to one that stood slightly apart, a tree that looked ancient and weary. It was an American persimmon, its trunk scarred and its branches crooked, reaching out like the gnarled hands of an elder. It appeared as dormant as any of the others, its leaves long since blown away. But then, Little Otter saw them, clinging stubbornly to the bare, high branches. Catching the morning light were small globes of deep, saturated orange. They looked like tiny, misplaced suns against the drab wood. To the boy, this was confusing. He remembered the persimmons from the summer, hard, green, little things. He had tried to bite one then, and the bitterness had been so astringent, so sharp, that it had felt like his mouth was shrinking. It was a taste of poison. Why would his grandmother bring them here now? Elk Woman stopped beneath the tree, her breath pluming in the cold air. "The frost has come," she said, her voice low and steady, "and the frost is a great changer of things." She reached up to a low-hanging branch and gently touched one of the orange fruits. Before the cold snap, it would have been as hard as a stone. Now her finger sank into it as if it were made of soft butter. It was so ripe it was almost bursting, the thin skin translucent and wrinkled. "The tree has been waiting for this," she explained, her eyes soft with the wonder of the process. "All summer, the fruit holds its bitterness tightly. It is its shield, but the deep cold is the key. The frost touches the fruit, and the spirit inside it changes completely. The bitterness turns to honey. What was hard becomes soft. The hardship is what unlocks the gift." It was a profound and quiet lesson, the most difficult one yet. The very event that had ruined their garden, the killing frost, was the essential element needed to create this specific sweetness. The world was not divided into good events and bad events. It was all one connected story. She plucked the fruit, and it came away with the lightest touch, a sign of its perfect readiness. She broke it open. Inside was a jelly-like amber pulp, so rich and dense it barely dripped. She handed half to Little Otter. He approached it with caution, the memory of the summer's bitterness still fresh. But he took a small bite. His eyes widened. The flavor was overwhelming, an intense, complex sweetness like dates and apricots, with a smooth, rich texture. It was the concentrated essence of summer warmth, made accessible only by the winter's cold. He smiled, a sticky, joyous smile, and reached for another. They began to gather the fruit, not from the branches, but from the ground. The tree, having given its gift, had released many of the ripest fruits, and they lay scattered like jewels among the frosted leaves. This was a gentle harvest, a gathering of things already given. There was no digging, no prying. They simply picked up the soft, heavy treasures. The pulp stained their fingers a sticky orange. As they moved around the base of the tree, their feet crushed the dried leaves with a pleasant, crackling sound, the only noise in the still morning air. It was a meditation on transformation, on finding abundance where only ruin seemed to lie. Their baskets were already diverse, holding the starchy security of the roots and the oily richness of the nuts. But this was the taste of joy. It was the proof that the earth provided not just for survival, but for delight. The persimmons were a gift for the present, to be eaten within a day or two, or laboriously dried into dense, sweet fruit leathers to be savored during the midwinter festivals. They were the dessert at the end of the harvest season. As they finished gathering the persimmons, River Reed made one last discovery. Scrambling over a nearby sun-warmed rock ledge was a tough, straggly vine that seemed, like the persimmon, to have ignored the cold. Its leaves were yellowed, but hanging from it were strange, leathery pods, the size of a small fist, some pale green, others dried to a papery brown. It was the maypop, the fruit of the passion flower. It was an odd, secretive plant. Elkwoman picked one of the dried pods and shook it. It rattled with the sound of loose seeds. The little noisemaker, she smiled. This was their final discovery, a curious and useful addition to their stores. She cracked open a greener pod. Inside was a mass of slippery dark seeds, each encased in a sack of tart, yellowish pulp. It was not sweet like the persimmon, but intensely fragrant and refreshing. She explained to Little Otter that this pulp, mashed and stirred into cold water, made a wonderful drink, known for calming the mind and easing tension. Now, their work was complete. The family stood together, their breath mingling in the cold air, and looked at what they had gathered over the past few days. In their baskets lay a complete story of the land's resilience. They had the deep earth sustenance of the sunchokes and groundnuts. They had the water-borne strength of the wapato. They had the forest's rich fat in the hickory nuts, the sustaining power of the parched amaranth and chenopodium seeds, and the vibrant, savory medicine of the ramps. And now, they carried the surprising, frost-sweetened joy of the persimmons and the calming gift of the maypop. They had begun this journey with the fear of the drought and the shock of the frost. They had watched their cultivated garden, their place of order and control, wither and fail. But in turning away from that loss and turning towards the land, they had found something greater, a wild, complex, and enduring abundance. They had learned that the land is never truly barren. It only changes its language. They had learned to read that language in the height of a spider's web, in the feel of the mud, in the scent of a fallen pawpaw, and in the color of a frozen fruit. With their baskets heavy and their hearts light, they turned their faces towards home. The sun was fully up now, a cold, bright disk in the hard blue sky. The walk back was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts, but held together by the shared experience. Little Otter walked with a new confidence. He knew the names of these foods now. He knew where they lived and what they required. He carried a small, heavy persimmon in his pocket, warming it with his hand, a secret piece of summer saved by the winter. They were not just survivors. They were participants in the great, slow turning of the world. They were prepared. The lodge awaited them, and the next phase of their work, the careful storing, the drying, the grinding, the turning of this raw bounty into the meals that would see them through, The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding respect for the earth and a quiet confidence in their own knowledge. The winter could come now. They were ready. The air inside their winter lodge was a world apart from the sharp, clear cold outside. It was a space of dim, warm light and the rich, mingled scents of wood smoke, drying herbs, and the earthy perfume of their gathered harvest. The central fire, now kept to a low, steady bed of glowing coals, cast a gentle, flickering orange light on the curved hide walls, making the small, round space feel safe, secure, and alive. This was their sanctuary, the warm heart of their world, and now it was to become their workshop. The journey of gathering was complete, but the final, crucial phase of their work, the quiet, collaborative preparation that ensures survival, had just begun. This chapter of their story was not about traveling far, but about settling in, about the steady, purposeful work of many hands that transforms a diverse and scattered collection of wild foods into a well-stocked and orderly larder. The soundscape was no longer the crunch of frosted leaves or the whisper of the wind, but the soft, domestic rhythms of slicing, grinding, and bundling, a gentle music of preparedness. Upon returning, the family did not rest. They moved with a shared, unspoken understanding of the tasks at hand, each member taking up their role in the complex but unhurried ballet of preservation. The loss of the main garden was now a memory, a story that had already found its meaning. It was not a story of failure, but a story of a necessary turn in the path, a detour that had led them to a different, wilder, and perhaps even deeper kind of abundance. Their hands were busy, their hearts were calm, and their small home was filled with the tangible evidence of a winter that would be well provided for. River Reed took charge of the sunchokes. The large knobby tubers had been scrubbed clean in the icy river water, their pale skins now showing off their faint, purplish blushes. Using a sharp flake of chert, a piece of flint napped to a keen edge, she began the methodical process of slicing them. With a steady hand and a focused eye, she cut the tubers into thin, uniform discs, each one almost translucent. The rhythmic, soft crunch of the sharp stone slicing through the crisp, starchy flesh was a deeply satisfying sound. As she worked, she created a growing pile of these perfect, pale circles. Each slice was a small coin of stored sunlight, and her work was the careful accounting of their newfound wealth. The lodge filled with the clean, slightly sweet smell of the raw sunchoke, a scent like fresh water and spring earth. Once a significant pile of the slices had been made, she moved to the drying rack. This was a simple but ingenious structure, a framework of 4 upright poles with a lattice of thin, flexible willow branches woven between them, suspended high above the fire pit. The position was crucial. It had to be high enough that the direct heat of the fire would not cook the food, but low enough that the gentle, constant draft of rising warm, smoky air would slowly and thoroughly draw the moisture out of each slice. She carefully laid the sun-choked discs onto the rack in a single layer, their edges just touching, creating a beautiful, pale mosaic against the dark willow branches. This was a slow, gentle form of cooking that would take many days. The rising smoke would not only dry the slices, turning them into light, brittle chips that could be stored for months without spoiling, but it would also infuse them with a faint, savory, smoky flavor, adding another layer of complexity to their winter meals. This was the quiet magic of smoke and air, a long, slow conversation that preserved life and added flavor, turning the watery weight of the fresh root into the concentrated, lasting essence of its spirit. While his mother was busy with the slicing, Little Otter was given a task that was just as important, though it required a different kind of strength and patience. His workspace was a large, slightly hollowed stone, a grinding basin that had been used by his grandmother and her grandmother before her. The stone surface was worn smooth and polished from generations of this very work. His tool was a mano, a smaller, rounded stone that fit perfectly in his 2 small hands. Before him, Elk Woman placed a shallow wooden bowl filled with the parched seeds they had prepared at the small camp. The tiny, black grains of amaranth from the garden's edge and the slightly larger, grayish-brown seeds of the chenopodium. His job was to turn these hard, dry seeds into flour. He poured a small handful of the seeds into the basin. At first, his motions were clumsy. He tried to push down hard, to crush the seeds with force, but they just skittered and scattered across the stone surface. "It is not a battle," Elk Woman said, her voice a low, encouraging murmur from across the lodge where she was working. "It is a dance. The stones are partners. Let them roll together." He took a breath and tried again. This time, instead of pushing down, he moved the mano in a slow, steady circular motion, allowing its weight to do the work. He began to feel the faint, gritty vibration as the hard seed coats started to break. A soft, shushing, sandy sound began to rise from the stone, a sound like a gentle tide pulling back across a fine pebbled beach. Shush, shush, shush. He fell into the rhythm of it. It was hard work. The muscles in his arms and shoulders began to ache with the steady, repetitive motion, but the sound was hypnotic, deeply calming. And slowly, magically, he saw the transformation. The pile of hard, distinct seeds was disappearing, becoming a soft, fine powder of a grayish-tan color. The air around him filled with the rich, nutty, toasted scent of the freshly ground flour. He paused and ran a finger through it. It was soft and fine, a testament to his patience and effort. This was real food, food that he had made with his own 2 hands. The small pile of flour seemed infinitely more precious than the seeds it had come from. He understood now that this flour held the strength of thousands of tiny lives, all brought together by his steady work. He poured the finished flour into a cured animal bladder, a storage container that would keep it dry and safe, and then pulled another handful of seeds into the basin, the steady, shushing rhythm beginning once more. Elk Woman's work was the most fragrant of all. She sat with the basket of freshly gathered ramps, their sharp, wild onion scent filling her corner of the lodge. Preservation for the ramps was simpler, a different kind of drying. She took a small bunch of them, their white bulbs and purple stems still vibrant, and using a thin, strong cord made of twisted milkweed fiber, she began to bundle them. Her fingers, gnarled with age but still incredibly nimble, moved with a practiced, efficient grace, wrapping the cord tightly around the stems, knotting it with a quick, deft twist. She created a series of these small, aromatic bouquets. Once a bundle was complete, she would hand it to Little Otter, who would carefully stand on a small stool and hang it from one of the lodge poles that supported the hide roof. Soon, a festive-looking garland of the green and purple bundles hung from the ceiling, slowly releasing their pungent, savory aroma into the smoky air. Like the sunchokes on the rack below them, they would slowly dry in the warm, dry atmosphere of the lodge, their flavor concentrating, becoming more intense. In the depths of winter, just a small piece of one of these dried ramp leaves, crumbled into a stew, would be enough to fill the whole lodge with the memory of the green, living forest. So the day passed, not in hours, but in the completion of these slow, satisfying tasks. The pile of unsliced sunchokes shrank as the drying rack filled. The bowl of unground seeds emptied as the flour bag grew heavier. The basket of fresh ramps was transformed into a fragrant garland hanging from the ceiling. There was a deep, comforting sense of purpose to their work. Each task completed was another layer of security, another story of a meal to be eaten in the cold moons to come. The lodge was no longer just a shelter. It had become a larder, a living pantry, its very air thick with the promise of nourishment. The fire in the center crackled softly, its light dancing on the busy hands of the grandmother, the mother, and the son, each contributing their part to the collective well-being of the family. There was no grand speech, no dramatic pronouncement. There was only the quiet, profound satisfaction of seeing the fruits of their labor, of their knowledge and their resilience, gathered safely within the warm circle of their home. All was well. The work was being done. They were ready. Several days passed, days filled with the quiet, methodical work of preservation. The sunchoke slices on the drying rack had shrunk and hardened into brittle, paper-thin chips. The ramps hanging from the ceiling had wilted and crisped, their potent aroma now a steady, mellow presence in the lodge. The bag of seed flour was full and heavy. Outside, the world continued its slow, silent surrender to the coming winter. The sky was often a high, pale gray, and the wind had a persistent, searching chill to it. Then, one afternoon, as River Reed was mending a seam on one of Little Otter's winter moccasins, the quality of the light filtering through the smoke hole at the top of the lodge began to change. It grew softer, more diffuse, and the sharp shadows cast by the lodge poles blurred at the edges. A profound hush fell over the world outside, a silence that seemed to absorb all sound. Little Otter, who had been playing quietly with a set of carved wooden animals, stopped and looked up, his head cocked. Elk Woman, who had been dozing by the fire, opened her eyes. They all felt it at the same time, a subtle, powerful shift in the atmosphere. River Reed put down her sewing and went to the lodge flap, pulling it aside just enough to peer out. The first snow had begun to fall. It was not a storm, not a driving blizzard, but a slow, gentle, and utterly silent descent of large, perfectly formed flakes. They drifted down from the gray sky with a lazy, unhurried grace, like soft white feathers. The ground, which had been a drab canvas of brown and gray, was already disappearing under a thin, pristine dusting of white. The stark, bare branches of the trees were being traced in delicate white lines. The world was being erased and redrawn, softened and simplified, blanketed in a profound and peaceful silence. River Reed watched for a long moment, a sense of deep calm settling over her. This was the true marker, the final closing of the door on the season of gathering. The earth was now putting on its winter blanket, preparing for its long sleep, and they, inside their warm lodge, were ready for it. The arrival of the snow was not a threat, it was a confirmation. It was the world outside finally catching up to the sense of preparedness and security they had built inside. She let the flap fall back into place, sealing them once more into their warm, firelit world. The gentle light from outside, filtered through the translucent hide of the lodge, now had a soft, luminous quality. She turned to her mother and her son. "It is time," she said, her voice filled with a quiet sense of ceremony. "It is time for our first winter meal." This was to be more than just a supper to fill their bellies. This was a ritual, a celebration of their journey, a meal of gratitude and remembrance. Every ingredient that would go into the pot held a story, a memory of a specific place and a specific lesson learned. The preparation of the meal was done with a deliberate, almost sacred care. River Reed took down their cooking vessel, a sturdy clay pot, burnished smooth and blackened from countless fires, and filled it with water from a skin she had brought in earlier. She hung the pot over the fire from a tripod of sturdy poles, and as the water began to warm, the first soft wisps of steam rose into the air, mingling with the wood smoke. The first ingredient she added was a generous handful of the dried sunchoke chips. As they hit the warm water, they hissed softly and began to unfurl, their pale forms slowly rehydrating, releasing their clean, earthy scent into the rising steam. This was the memory of that first, cold morning after the frost, the feeling of their hands in the cold earth, and the profound lesson of looking beneath the surface to find hidden strength. Next, from another small pouch, she took a spoonful of a coarse, grayish flour. This was made from the wapato, the arrowhead corms they had gathered with their feet from the cold mud of the marshy inlet. As she stirred it into the pot, the water began to thicken, turning into a rich, cloudy broth. This was the memory of the water's generosity, a reminder that sustenance could be found even in the soft, yielding mud, a lesson in adaptability and trust. The pot was now bubbling gently, the soft, rhythmic sound a comforting presence in the quiet lodge. It was the sound of life, of nourishment being created. From a carved wooden bowl, Elk Woman took a small scoop of a thick, pale, golden oil. This was the final product of their long work with the hickory nuts, rendered from the leached and pounded nut meats. She let it drizzle into the stew, and it spread across the surface in a shimmering, fragrant slick. This oil was the very essence of the forest's richness, the concentrated fat and energy that would keep them warm and strong through the coldest nights. Its addition was the memory of patience, of the slow work of stone on shell, of the river's gentle washing, a testament to the fact that the richest gifts often require the most patient work to unlock. Finally, from the garland hanging above them, River Reed took down one of the dried ramp bundles. The leaves were dry and brittle, but their scent was still incredibly potent. She crumbled a few of the dark green leaves between her fingers, and a sharp, savory, wild onion perfume filled the air, cutting through the milder scents of the stew. This was the memory of the deep woods, of the wolf track in the sand, a reminder of their connection to the wild, healthy, and complete world, a taste of life and medicine to awaken the senses. The stew simmered, and the lodge filled with a rich, complex, and deeply comforting aroma. It smelled of earth and water, of forest and fire. Little Otter sat close to the hearth, his eyes fixed on the bubbling pot, his face warm from the fire's glow. He could smell every story in that stew. He could smell the cold morning in the meadow, the feel of the cool mud between his mother's toes, the sharp scent of the ramps in the shady hollow. It was more than just food. It was the story of their survival, a story of their family, all held together in one warm, steaming pot. As they ate, there was no need for grand speeches or formal thanks. Their gratitude was a shared, unspoken presence in the air. The meal was simple, yet it contained the memory of their entire journey. The stew was thick and deeply nourishing. The rehydrated sunchokes were soft and slightly sweet. The wapato flour gave the broth a satisfying body. The hickory oil added a profound richness and depth of flavor, and the savory, pungent taste of the ramps brought it all to life. The warmth of the food spread through them, a deep and lasting peace that settled in their bones. It was a warmth that came not just from the hot meal, but from the knowledge of what it represented, the resilience of the land, the strength of their family, and the enduring power of the wisdom that had been passed down from the ancestors, a chain of knowledge that stretched back beyond memory. Outside, the silent snow continued to fall, covering the world in a thick, quiet blanket, but inside the lodge, all was warmth, all was safety, all was well. The first winter meal was complete. The story is now complete. The journey that began under the harsh, dry sun in a thirsty garden has come to its quiet, peaceful close. The family is safe. The larder, woven into the very fabric of their lodge, is full. Outside, the silent theater of the snow continues its gentle performance, flake after flake drifting down, covering the sleeping earth in a thick, insulating blanket of white. The familiar shapes of the clearing, the ruined garden, the wood pile, the great flat stone of their outdoor workshop, are all softened now, their sharp edges rounded, their details erased, all made one under the unifying cloak of winter. The river, a dark, slow-moving ribbon against the white banks, flows on, its voice hushed. The only tracks in the fresh snow are the faint, delicate footprints of a single chickadee that has hopped from a low-hanging branch to the ground and back again. The world has grown profoundly quiet, tucked in for its long and necessary rest. And now, you are invited to feel that same quiet settle in the air around you. Let the sounds of your own world fade into the background, just as the details of the landscape have faded under the snow. Inside the lodge, the fire, which had burned brightly for their evening meal, has now been banked for the night. The large logs have burned down to a deep, mesmerizing bed of glowing orange coals, a living heart of warmth that breathes a soft, steady heat into the small, round space. There is no longer the sharp crackle of burning wood, only a deep, almost inaudible hum of contained energy. A faint, shimmering heat haze rises from the embers, and occasionally, a tiny, silent spark will rise with it, dance for a moment in the darkness, and then wink out. The gentle, pulsing glow of the coals is the only light now, a light that does not demand attention, but offers a deep, primal comfort. It paints the curved walls and the sleeping forms of the family in soft shades of orange and deep velvety shadow. Elk Woman, River Reed, and Little Otter are asleep. The work of the day, and of all the days before it, is done. The stories have all been told, not in words, but in the gathering and preparing of the food that now sustains them. There is nothing left to do but rest. They lie on their soft sleeping platforms, which are raised slightly off the cold earth floor and padded with thick layers of fragrant balsam fir boughs. They are wrapped in the heavy, luxurious warmth of bison robes, the thick fur incredibly soft and insulating against the deep chill that permeates the world outside their thin hide walls. You can almost feel the reassuring weight of those robes, a gentle, steady pressure that calms the body and quiets the mind. Their breathing is slow and even, a quiet, rhythmic chorus that rises and falls in the warm, still air of the lodge. It is the sound of deep, untroubled sleep, the sleep of those who are safe, who are warm, who are well fed, and who know in their hearts that they have all that they need. Let the image of that glowing fire warm you. Feel its soft, orange light on your closed eyelids. Imagine the steady, gentle heat radiating outwards, pushing back the cold, creating a small, perfect circle of warmth and safety. There is no draft here, no sharp edge of cold. There is only the deep, bone-warming peace of a well-tended hearth. Let the weight of a heavy, soft blanket settle around you now, just like the bison robes wrapped around the sleeping family. Feel it touch your shoulders, your arms, your legs. Let it anchor you, giving your body permission to release its tension, to let go of the day. The earth itself is breathing deep in its long winter sleep, covered by its soft, white blanket. The trees are resting, their energy pulled down deep into their roots. The animals are in their dens and burrows, safe in the dark, quiet earth. The whole world is exhaling, letting go, entering a state of profound and necessary rest, and you can breathe with it. Take a slow, deep breath in, feeling the air fill your lungs, and now, let it out with a long, soft sigh. With that sigh, let go of any thoughts of the day that is past, of the work that is done. Let go of any thoughts of the day to come, of the work that is waiting. In this moment, here in the warmth and the quiet, there is nothing that needs to be done. There is nothing that needs to be decided. All is well. It is safe to rest now. It is time to let the quiet of the winter lodge become your own quiet. It is time to let the deep, peaceful breathing of the sleeping family become your own breathing. It is time to sleep,